Welcome everyone to the second annual DPE Summit. We're sold out. Not everyone has arrived yet from the South Bay, I guess. So thanks again to last year's speakers and attendees who made their 2022 Summit special, right, by their amazing talks, their openness, their contributions to all the informal hallway exchanges. And we want to do exactly the same this year. I started my personal journey in our space 15 years ago, out of serious frustration with the ineffectiveness of the developer toolchain. It is very exciting for me to see how pretty recently it has become a standard for most organizations to have dedicated teams for platform engineering, DPE, and DX. Our industry is more and more acknowledging the need to invest into this area and the vision behind it. What hasn't changed compared to last year is the huge discrepancy when it comes to the amount of investment. When we look at the ratio of platform engineers, DX and DPE engineers compared to the overall number of developers, we're seeing a range from 0.1% to 20% for companies with more than 2,000 developers. This is a difference of 2 orders of magnitude, and differences in the toolchain or build your own versus buy can only marginally explain this spread. So we have a ratio of 10% at Gradle Inc., and everyone who works at a company that has decent developer productivity knows that 0.1% is not cutting it. We need to do a better job in educating the engineering leadership at those companies why the business impact is worth a much higher investment, but that this investment is also required. So to achieve this, we need to dig deeper into 4 areas. Cognitive science was the topic of my keynote last year. The brains of the developers are the key production resource for software. And there is an amazing body of knowledge available about brains. It's called cognitive science. We just need to study it. Only by better understanding how our brains work will we deeply understand why an immature toolchain has such a severe negative productivity impact. Engineering leadership that doesn't know the very basics about their main production resource is not equipped to make the best decisions. Industry surveys. We got some interesting stuff this year. GitHub, for example, partnered with Wakefield Research to survey 500 US-based developers at enterprise companies. And here's the most striking result. Developers say they spend the same amount of time waiting for build and test as they do writing code. If that is correct, how can you invest only 0.1% of your personal for fixing a problem that is by far your biggest bottleneck? I'm curious what the explanation would be from those organizations. So the other thing that I think is extremely helpful, right, is studies by the big fours, the Microsoft, the Googles, they have the Facebooks, the Apples, they have amazing end-to-end visibility into their whole software development lifecycle process. And they have the means to analyze this data comprehensively. They can make a huge impact on progressing platform engineering and developer productivity research no one else could by sharing their findings. So, and this is happening. For example, Brian Good from Microsoft presented at our DPE forum in Seattle a couple of months ago. He stated that Microsoft is now able to clearly show that even small decreases in feedback cycle time will increase predictably the output of the developers. He said they're now in an every second count mindset because of that. So Brian will talk about this and a lot of other interesting things at our DPE forum in New York City next week. So drop by if you're in the area. Microsoft has not published a paper yet on this specific finding, but might do so in the future. I really hope so. While it is obvious to many of us that there is a strong correlation, strong empirical proof between feedback cycle time and developer output is one of the holy grails of DPE. It even gave a very productivity-focused company like Microsoft additional conviction and incentive to invest even more. The complexity of the software development lifecycle and its impact on software developers is very virtual and hard to intuitively understand if you're not deeply in it. Other industries are more concrete, more comprehensible. Analogies to those industries are a great educational tool to explain the principles and effects of investing into developer productivity. It is invaluable, in my opinion, to look outside of your box. And the more outside your usual frame of reference, the more it can help to crystallize the essence and basic principles of what we're doing. And I want to do such a comparison with another industry today. It's about knife usage in meat processing plants. To be clear, I'm not doing this as a gimmick, right? There will be no images of carcasses. I was a vegetarian for 10 years, and this is still my main diet. But I don't want to miss out on the very helpful analogies to platform engineering and DX. Humankind is using tools for dissecting carcasses for millions of years. Everyone understands it. It is in between the artisanal and a fully automated process, like cutting vegetables, right? And that is very similar to where we are with software development at scale, between the artisanal and fully automated. That will remain like this for a long time. So the primary tool we are looking at is the knife. And KPI we are looking at is sharpness. There is a strong correlation between knife sharpness and the experience and productivity of the worker, also called operators. So knife sharpness reduces fatigue and RSI. It increases workspace safety because of fewer lacerations and slips. Everyone who has ever cut with a blunt knife understands that. It increases throughput and it increases the cut quality and the product presentation. So there are obvious equivalents to software development, right? First of all, the equivalent to sharpness is multidimensional, right? It's things like build and test time and feedback quality, but improving the toolchain sharpness means less cognitive fatigue, or it sets in later. We talked a lot about that last year. There's no, I guess, obvious equivalent to workplace safety, right? Maybe if you had too many flaky tests during the day, you say, to hell with the red light, I merge on your way home. I don't know. Throughput doesn't need any mapping, and the equivalent to cut quality is software quality. So there's strong similarities. So I have a question. Could anyone in the room provide me with a unit of measurement for the sharpness of your kitchen knives at home? No one, right? That's what I expected, right? And I would also have only a rough idea. And it's interesting, only since 2014, there are simple devices available that you can use to measure the sharpness of a knife. Those devices introduced the BESS scale, BESS, and it's based on the weight needed to push a knife through a certified test medium. So let's look at different levels of sharp, right? Let's start with the top. So if you don't regularly sharpen, not hone, sharpen your knives, and if they are not pretty new, they will all be dull and way above 500 BESS, right? Regardless of whether you paid $10 or $1,000 for your knife, unless you have never used them. And at the bottom, there's extreme sharpness with 30 BESS or less. If a hair falls down like a snowflake and hits a 30 BESS blade, the hair will just split in two. It's pretty insane. It's a very fragile state of sharpness though. Just oxidation via air exposure will be enough to blunt the blade within hours to a BESS score above 50. So let's come back to the processing plant. At a meat processing plant, everyone is in full alignment that knife sharpness is important. You will not find a plant with blunt knives, right? In contrast to our industry. But let's say one day a worker says, I have an idea to make our knives even sharper. It will cost us $10,000 a month. How do they make a decision? What is the ideal knife sharpness for a meat processing plant? It is not 30 BESS, right? You would have to replace a knife every 10 seconds and very expensive sharpening to achieve this. The problem is that in meat processing plants, it is not common practice yet to measure the sharpness of knives and draw conclusions from it, similar to our industry. So, there's a cutting-edge knife sharpening company and consultancy in Australia, and in 2018, they did a study at a meat processing plant in Sydney where they measured knife sharpness over time. They published their findings in the May 2018 edition of the Australian Meat News magazine, and for the ones who don't have a copy at home, you can download it for free. So one thing this article validates is what we're seeing over and over again. Once you collect data and you start looking at it, a whole new world opens up. One very interesting correlation they found is between the skill level of a worker and the average sharpness of a knife. So the knives of less skilled operators dull much quicker than those of more skilled operators because of the difference in cutting technique. So you can use sharpness to find out where training is needed and to validate whether the training worked. What could be an equivalent to our industry? I'm pretty sure that normalized slow builds and test time often indicate struggles with writing performance tests or having good modularization. I know only a small number of software companies who have started to use toolchain data as a trigger for training purposes. It's a treasure chest and in the interest of everyone with a growth mindset. So to continue to follow their study, it is important to understand the differences between honing and sharpening. So what you see here is a microscopic image of an intact knife edge that became rolled after usage. And honing straightens such a rolled edge, right? So you might have such a thing at home, right? A honing rod. And this is something a worker, an operator will do frequently during the day with such a honing steel. The heavy-duty night work in the meat plant will start damaging the blade more and more pretty quickly. After 5 hours or so, no honing can compensate for the deterioration of the edge. Right? So to make the knife useful again, you need to sharpen it. So you need to create a new edge by removing the old one via abrasives. And when you know what you're doing, it looks like this afterwards. One important thing they did with the data was comparing different knife brands. There are quite some differences between the brands, as you can see, right, as the sharpness evolves over time, or the dullness. And they all started with the same sharpness, but the edge retention was different. What is not included in the graph is the honing frequency of the operators, and it was different for each knife brand. In the green curve, the knife became sharper at one point because the workers had to hone much more frequently. If those knives all cost the same, it looks like there's an easy decision to be made. But we will talk more about this later. Like development teams, the operators have lots of discussions and opinions about what works best, right? Some people prefer certain knife brands. Others thought that fluted knives, you see those flutes at the near the edge, would work better. So now that they can measure sharpness, they were able to do an experiment, which in this case invalidated the hypothesis fluted knives are worse. They could do other experiments like identifying the most edge-friendly cutting boards, plenty of stuff to analyze to make people more productive and improve their experience. And I think it's so important to get unnecessary noise out of the system. When a lot of people are emotional about certain topics and have different opinions, those never-ending discussions can be exhausting and counterproductive. Being able to put them to rest via experiments not just leads finally to a decision, it leads to the best possible decision and creates focus and reduces stress levels by stopping those discussions. So think about it. So far, we have only measured. Without even improving the actual tools, we have identified training potential, we can now come up with the right sharpening frequency, and made some decisions and put some discussions to rest people were having for years. There are millions of equivalents to software development, right? What is the best hardware, the best OS, the best file system? Are certain annotation processors worth it? What about the usefulness of fully distributed builds for medium-sized Java projects? Anyone has an opinion? Anyone has any data? So The small Australian company that was helping with the measurements is also a world leader when it comes to cutting-edge artisanal knife sharpening. They're able to create much sharper knives compared to the typical sharpening procedures. And not just this, depending on the type of steel a knife brand is using, they can sharpen differently to have the optimal edge retention based on the steel. So, for example, knife edges with softer steel are less brittle, but to maintain their edge, they need a larger bevel angle compared to knives with a harder steel. If they would do another study using their advanced sharpening technologies, the curves would shift down, the workers had to do less honing, and the delta between the knife brands would probably be smaller. And the order might be completely reversed. Not sure what that means, for example, for build systems, but naively, people tend to think that the knife brand is the most important piece. But it's only one important piece of a puzzle. Whatever reasonable knife brand you have, even more important is the sharpening technology, collecting data, and having the bandwidth and skills to interpret the data and apply the learnings. So I hope you found it interesting to look at platform and developer productivity engineering from the perspective of another industry. We discussed last year that for developers, making the business case is the biggest obstacle for getting budget for developer productivity initiatives. We need to sell and convince, right? Stories and analogies are extremely important in winning people over who are not in the middle of it. I think it can also help everyone to see the forest for the trees and to be able to map actions to common principles. Now, I want to share an announcement with you. Let me start with the backstory. Our company, Gradle Inc., started as a knife maker. We are proud of our popular knife brand, the Gradle build system. And in our early years, when we paid the bills doing consulting, we went to a lot of processing plants from the East Coast to the West Coast and everywhere in between. That is where we learned about the whole puzzle, beyond what makes a good knife. That led to the creation of Gradle Enterprise. And there are other popular knife brands out there. They're all used in the same types of plans. And what we always cared about was helping developers. So we started to support Apache Maven with Gradle Enterprise in 2019 and recently added support for Bazel and SBT. More build systems will be added to that list in the future. End of backstory. Here's the announcement.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good.
Gradle Enterprise is now Develocity, and the new website will be live soon. Really good validations for the importance of DPE is that many popular open source projects are seeing a strong need in improving their developer experience and productivity. It's important for a healthy contributor community and for getting things done with often very limited resources. So we are already supporting many foundational open source projects. We host instances of Develocity for all those projects. And our solutions team is working closely with them to optimize their builds and tests. I'm very proud of the work we're doing with them and the positive effect it has on the open source community. And we're about to bring this to the next level, so stay tuned for some additional announcements around Develocity and the open source community. Underinvesting into developer productivity is something we need to overcome as an industry. To continue to flourish as a profession, we're under more pressure than the years before. We have to provide the best possible return of investment. So the very future of professional software development will be affected if this is not fixed. If in 5 years' time, waiting for builds and tests still takes you as much time as writing new code, that is not a good future. So when I started working on this keynote, I was looking for an inspirational quote that points us in the right direction. And I found the following. So I was super excited. I thought I had discovered the lost founding father of developer productivity engineering. Then I went to some quote research website and they said, it's actually not from Lincoln. Some marketing dude in 1956 decided to attribute it to him without any historical evidence. Just like that, it's used frequently as a Lincoln quote, right? All over the place. So it feels like the Lincoln letter in the movie The Hateful Eight. Well, if Lincoln hasn't said it, then I will just claim it. It's fundamentally true. I wish you a wonderful conference. Thanks for coming.